It was just before sunrise, the kind of morning where the sky didn't quite know if it wanted to snow or weep. Clouds hovered low, thick and heavy, and the world was dipped in muted shades of gray. The parking lot behind the small-town grocery store was still mostly empty. Just a few cars crusted with ice, their windows fogged from the breath of drivers who had left them hours before. Salt lines streaked the asphalt like old battle scars. Near the far end of the lot, wedged between a frozen lamp-post and an overflowing cart corral, sat a single shopping cart. Rusted wheels, a bent frame, and inside it, curled tightly into a ball of fur and trembles, was a German Shepherd puppy. He was small, too small to be alone. His paws were still too big for his legs. His ears hadn't yet decided whether to stand tall or flop sideways. His coat was dusted with fine snow, melting slower than it should have from the chill in the air. But he didn't move. He just sat there, silent and still, holding in his mouth a ragged blue plush toy. What once might have been a stuffed bear or maybe a rabbit. Now it was just threads and sorrow. There was no collar around his neck, no food, no blanket, just a frayed toy, and a quiet that screamed louder than words ever could. The world around him stirred. A delivery truck passed, sloshing through slush. A man stepped outside the store to smoke, glanced his way, then turned back around. The early risers came and went. Doors opened, doors closed, trunks slammed, engines roared to life. But no one stopped. Not yet. The puppy blinked slowly, his dark brown eyes glossy with cold tears. Not from pain, not even from fear, but from waiting. You could see it in the way he stared beyond the parking lot. Not scanning, not searching. Waiting. Like someone had made a promise. Like someone had said, "Stay here. I'll be back." And he believed them. That belief kept him still. Hours passed. The world grew brighter, but not warmer. Flakes of snow began to fall again, swirling around him, catching in his fur. He shook a little, almost shivering, but never made a sound. He didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't cry out for help. He waited. That silence was the loudest part of it all. Somewhere far away, a child was crying into a pillow. A decision had been made, not by the boy, but for him. One that cracked his heart in two. And that child clutched the same kind of blue plush toy, only newer, only whole, and whispered the name Max like a prayer. But back in the parking lot, Max didn't know why he was alone. He didn't understand the ache in his belly, or why his paws burned from the cold, or why every familiar smell had vanished. He only knew that he'd been told to wait, and so he did. People noticed, eventually. A woman in a thick red coat pushed a cart nearby, glanced into the lonely cart where Max lay, then hesitated. Her eyebrows furrowed. She took a single step closer. Max lifted his head, just barely. Blue toy still held between his tiny teeth. But then a voice called out, "Susan, come on, it's freezing." She flinched, gave the puppy one last look, and walked away. The cart rattled with wind. The snow thickened. Max adjusted his body in the basket, curling tighter. His toy fell from his mouth and rested beside his chin. He didn't even have the energy to pull it back. And then the silence was broken. The squeak of boots. The crunch of ice. A young man, barely more than a teenager, with a knit hat pulled low over his ears and a bag of groceries in one arm, stopped. He looked down at the cart, at Max. Their eyes met. It was brief. Just a flicker of recognition. The man dropped his bag, apple scattering, and crouched low. "Hey, buddy." His voice cracked on the word buddy, not because he was cold, but because something about the sight before him wrapped its fingers around his throat and squeezed. He reached a hand toward Max slowly, cautiously, not wanting to startle him. Max didn't move. He just looked. Deep, liquid eyes filled with the weight of every second he had waited. And then, gently, the man placed his palm beneath the puppy's chin. "You've been out here all night?" Max didn't answer. Of course he couldn't. But his tiny head leaned into the warmth of the touch. And that was enough. The man looked around. No note. No collar. Just the shredded toy and the silence. He took off his scarf, wrapped it around Max, and cradled him like a child. The puppy didn't resist. Didn't flinch. He just sagged into the embrace like he'd been holding himself together with sheer will. As they walked away, a few shoppers turned to look. Some murmured. Others took pictures. But no one said anything. They didn't have to. Because deep down everyone knew. Something sacred had just happened. A connection was made. One soul recognizing another. The snow began to lighten as they reached the car. The man placed Max in the passenger seat, turning the heat up. The dog shivered once, then curled into the coat draped over the seat, his blue toy tucked against his nose. The man stared for a long while before putting the key in the ignition. He didn't know where this story started, but he knew where his part in it began. Right here, with a shopping cart, and a puppy who still believed someone was coming back. The engine hummed softly as the heater whirred to life, pushing out warm gusts into the small car. Max, still wrapped in the young man's scarf, curled tighter into the passenger seat, his head resting delicately on the sleeve of the winter coat draped over the cushion. His little body shook with shivers that didn't come from the cold anymore. They came from the unknown. The young man, whose name was Evan, stole quiet glances at the puppy every few seconds as he drove, as if needing to confirm that the moment wasn't a dream, that the puppy with the heartbroken eyes was really there, that this fragile, furry bundle, who hadn't barked, hadn't whined, hadn't demanded a single thing, was truly depending on him now. And he was. Max didn't know where they were going. He didn't know this stranger who carried him, warmed him, and whispered softly while placing him in a strange, moving box. But what he did know was that something inside him had loosened. A tightness he hadn't understood finally began to fade. For the first time since that shopping cart, Max didn't feel forgotten. The streets rolled by, houses blanketed in snow, mailboxes dressed in icicles, and driveways dotted with half-shoveled paths. A world moving forward as usual. But inside that car, time had slowed. There was only Max, the quiet hum of the heater, and Evan's cautious breathing. Evan was 22, still figuring out what it meant to be an adult. He worked at the local grocery store, rented a small one-bedroom apartment, and didn't exactly have space or plans for a dog. But none of that mattered now. Not after what he'd seen. Not after the way that puppy had looked at him. "I don't know your name," he murmured, eyes on the road but heart in the seat beside him. "I don't know where you came from, but I promise you're not going back there." Max shifted at the sound of his voice. It wasn't the words he understood. It was the tone, the quiet kindness, the same kind he'd once heard from a little boy's mouth. A boy who'd kissed his forehead and whispered something before the world went silent and cold. That memory hurt, but Max clung to it, because it meant love had been real once. Evan pulled into his apartment complex, a modest building tucked between a hardware store and a laundromat. The snow had mostly stopped, but the world was still dipped in a post-storm silence, like even nature was holding its breath. He opened the passenger door and scooped Max gently into his arms again. The scarf stayed wrapped tight, the frayed blue toy nestled in Max's mouth once more. Evan held him like glass, fragile and precious, and Max let him. Inside the apartment, the warmth hit instantly. It smelled faintly of coffee, laundry soap, and old books. Evan laid Max on a pile of folded blankets near the heater, then stepped back slowly, crouching beside him. "You're safe," he said softly. "You don't have to wait anymore." But Max still waited, not because he didn't believe Evan, but because the hope inside him hadn't figured out where else to go. It had only ever known one thing: wait in the last place they left you. So even now, wrapped in heat and comfort, Max's eyes lingered on the door. Just in case. Evan didn't rush anything. He brought out a small bowl of water and placed it gently near Max's paws. He opened a can of tuna, apologizing out loud for not having dog food, and watched as Max sniffed it cautiously before taking the tiniest lick. Every movement was slow, hesitant, like Max wasn't sure if this kindness would last. Evan sat on the floor nearby, legs crossed, watching the puppy with a kind of wonder that tangled with sadness. "How could someone leave you?" he asked, mostly to himself. But again, Max said nothing. He just looked. Those eyes, still filled with too much age for such a young dog, pierced right through Evan's chest. And then something shifted. Max stood. It was shaky, and his paws wobbled beneath him, but he rose from the blankets, took one step forward, then another, until he was pressed against Evan's leg. He didn't bark. He didn't nudge. He just rested there. And Evan, he broke. Tears slipped silently down Evan's cheeks. He didn't sob, didn't speak, just sat there, one hand slowly stroking Max's head as the puppy finally allowed himself to lean. It was more than a physical touch. It was a trust fall, a surrender, the beginning of something neither of them had expected that day. "I guess we're figuring this out together," Evan whispered. Max's tail flicked once. It was the smallest thing, but in that moment it was everything. The night came quickly, as winter nights do. Evan made a small bed out of pillows beside his own, not wanting to leave Max alone. He placed the blue toy, now gently cleaned with a warm cloth, next to the spot. Max curled into it, burying his nose against the stuffed fabric like it was stitched with memories. And Evan, he laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, one hand resting off the edge, where Max could reach it if he needed to. He didn't know what tomorrow held, didn't know if the puppy was sick, or scared, or still waiting for someone who wasn't him. But he knew one thing. No one would ever walk past him again. Not while Evan was here. As the moon rose and blanketed the apartment in soft silver light, Max stirred in his sleep. Tiny paws twitched. A soft whimper escaped his lips. Maybe he was dreaming of the cart. Or maybe he was remembering the boy with the warm hands and broken heart. But then he shifted, pressed closer to the edge of the bed, and touched Evan's fingertips. Morning sunlight crept through the blinds, soft and golden, casting long, sleepy stripes across the room. The warmth of it slid across the wooden floor and gently found the puppy, still curled in his blanket, nest beside the bed. He didn't stir. Not yet. He was still tucked deep into the safety of dreams, dreams that weren't dark or cold for the first time in days. Evan blinked awake, lying still for a moment. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't stretch. He turned his head and looked down. The puppy was there. Still breathing, still waiting. But this time, his body was more relaxed. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. His little paws twitched once or twice. And beside him, the blue toy was wrapped in his front legs like it meant everything. Because to him it did. Evan smiled softly, barely a tug at the corner of his mouth. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. The puppy stirred at the sound of Evan's voice, just slightly. One ear twitched. A sleepy blink followed. Then slowly, the German Shepherd puppy lifted his head and looked up. And for the first time, Evan saw it. Hope. It was small, barely a spark, but it was there, flickering in the puppy's tired eyes. And that's when Evan realized he couldn't keep calling him buddy. "You need a name," Evan said quietly as he poured coffee into a chipped mug, glancing at the puppy who had followed him halfway to the kitchen and was now seated like a small shadow near his feet. "You deserve more than silence." The puppy tilted his head, curious, eyes still cautious. Evan crouched down, holding the mug in both hands. "I don't know what your name was before, or if you ever even had one, but I think maybe you need a new one, a beginning." He watched the puppy's expression, those expressive eyes, those listening ears. "I was thinking about Max," Evan continued, a little shy. "Short, simple, but strong. Like you. I mean, I know we just met, but you held on. You waited. That takes strength." The puppy didn't wag his tail. Not yet, but his ears perked higher, and he didn't look away. "Max," Evan said again, testing it, tasting it in the air. "Do you like that?" And then barely there, the puppy took a step closer. That was enough. The rest of the morning was a gentle blur. Max explored the apartment in careful circles, sniffing at furniture legs, pausing at the sound of the fridge opening, watching Evan with curious eyes that never quite turned away. He didn't bark, didn't whine, but he followed. He was learning, in his own quiet way, that this strange place might be safe, that this strange man might be kind. And Evan, on the other side of that awareness, watched him like someone watching a miracle unfold, because that's what it felt like. Later that day, Evan carried Max into his car again, not because he had anywhere special to go, but because he needed to do something. Anything. The shelter was an option, But even thinking of handing Max over made his chest tighten. He didn't belong in a cage. Not again. Instead, Evan drove to the local pet store. A small, independently run place, tucked between an old record shop and a bakery that always smelled like warm cinnamon and heaven. The bell above the door jingled as they stepped in. The warmth hit immediately. So did the smell, rubber toys, cedar bedding, and the earthy scent of dog food. It wasn't fancy, but it felt welcoming. Max clung close to Evan's leg as they walked. His steps were small, hesitant, but not afraid. Not anymore. An older woman with silver hair and bright eyes stood behind the counter. She looked up and smiled the moment she saw them. "Oh," she said, stepping around the register. "A new friend." Evan nodded. "Found him yesterday. He was left in a shopping cart." Her face changed instantly, softening with sorrow and something maternal. "Oh, honey," she whispered, crouching slightly, but not reaching out. "You poor thing." Max watched her carefully. Then, to everyone's surprise, he stepped closer. Just one step. "Strong boy," she murmured. "You're a strong boy." Evan smiled. "His name's Max." The woman's smile deepened. "A good name." They spent nearly an hour inside, picking out a small collar, blue to match the toy, along with a few essentials, bowls, puppy food, a bed Evan wasn't sure Max would sleep in yet, and a name tag with Max, engraved in gentle lettering. It felt like a ceremony, a welcome into the world again. As they walked back to the car, the cold bit into Evan's cheeks, but he didn't mind. Max trotted beside him now, still close, still cautious, but not trembling. "Look at you," Evan said quietly, opening the door. "Little adventurer." And for the first time, Max wagged his tail. Back home, Evan laid out the bed, the food, the water. Max sniffed everything, then curled up in the same spot near the heater where he had slept the night before. The blue toy, now starting to fray at the edges, rested between his paws. Evan sat near him, the silence filled only by the quiet hum of the heater and the ticking of a clock. He thought about everything. About the shopping cart. About the waiting. About the fact that Max had never barked. Not once. Not when Evan found him. Not when they drove. Not even now. A dog that young should be noisy, full of life. But Max, he was still waiting. Still grieving. Still holding on to something he hadn't let go of. "I don't know what happened to you," Evan whispered. "But whatever it was, I'm sorry." Max didn't move. But he listened. He always listened. That night, Evan placed a new collar gently around Max's neck. It clicked shut with a soft sound. Max didn't flinch. He just looked up at Evan with those eyes. The same eyes that once stared down a parking lot of strangers and waited for someone to come back. Only now, there was something else in them. Not just hope. Trust. As they settled in for the night again, Max curled into his new bed, Evan on the couch nearby. They both seemed to exhale. Like something heavy had been lifted. Like they had begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had found each other for a reason. Not by accident, but because broken things sometimes find one another, just in time to help each other heal. And so Max closed his eyes, and didn't dream of the cart. He dreamed of the boy with the scarf, and the man with the voice that called him by a name he never knew he needed. Max. It was early afternoon when Evan clipped the new blue leash onto Max's collar. Outside, the wind was sharp, but the sun was generous, spilling down in golden puddles between the buildings, melting small patches of ice along the sidewalk. Max sat at the door, ears alert, his tail lightly thumping against the floor. "This is just a short walk," Evan said, holding the leash loosely. "If you don't like it, we'll come right back." Max didn't move until Evan opened the door. The moment the breeze hit, Max stepped outside cautiously, sniffing the air. The world beyond the apartment was still big, still strange, but it didn't make him retreat. Not this time. They walked slowly down the block. Evan didn't pull. He let Max take the lead. Every step was tentative, but Max's nose worked overtime, sniffing mailbox posts, rusted fences, and the faint traces of other dogs who'd walked there before. It was like decoding the world one scent at a time. Neighbors passed, bundled in jackets and scarves, some offering polite nods, others soft smiles. "New dog?" a woman asked from behind a stroller. Evan nodded. Yeah, just adopted. Max didn't bark. He didn't wag much. But he stood still, watching. Processing. He's beautiful, she said. What's his name? Max. The name felt more right each time Evan said it. They reached the corner of Maple and 3rd, an old intersection marked by a crooked street lamp and a bench that had seen better days. It was quiet, familiar, and suddenly Max stopped. Not because of fear, because of memory. Evan didn't realize it at first, but Max's legs locked. His body went rigid, his gaze fixed on something invisible. It was just a bench. But for Max, it wasn't just a bench. It was a reminder. Because even though he hadn't been left at this exact one, it looked just like the one in the parking lot. Cold metal, worn paint, a place where things were left behind. And for a long, silent moment, Max just stared. Evan knelt beside him. Hey, he said gently, reaching out to touch Max's side. You okay? Max didn't look at him. His eyes were elsewhere, behind that bench, beyond it, somewhere Evan couldn't follow. Evan sat down on the edge of the sidewalk, beside Max. The world around them kept moving. A car drove by. A crow cawed overhead. But for them, time had paused. You were waiting there, weren't you? Evan whispered. Not just for food. Not just for warmth. You were waiting for them. Max finally blinked. I wish I knew who they were, Evan continued, his voice cracking a little. I wish I could ask them why they left you like that. Max lowered his head slowly and placed it on Evan's knee. And Evan understood. He didn't need answers. He needed peace. They sat for a long time. Long enough for clouds to gather and the breeze to shift. Evan looked at the leash, still held gently in his hand. At Max, who didn't want to run, who didn't want to hide, who just needed to pause, to feel what he needed to feel. Healing never arrived all at once. Sometimes it began in silence, with a single breath beside a bench that looked like the one where your heart was broken. On the way home, Max walked a little closer to Evan's side, not pressed against him, but near enough that Evan could hear his paws click on the sidewalk in sync with his own footsteps. It was a rhythm, a quiet conversation, one that said, I don't trust everything yet, but I trust you. Back inside the apartment, Evan poured water into Max's bowl and watched as he drank with slow gulps. The little bed beside the heater had been reshaped, pawed and turned into a cocoon that Max seemed to be claiming more with each passing hour. But Evan knew, deep down, it wasn't the heater, the leash, or even the food that would make Max feel like he belonged. It would be the consistency, the presence, the choice to show up every day. That night, Evan pulled out an old cardboard box from his closet. Inside were scraps of another life, photos, books, college notes, and things he hadn't touched in years. He was looking for something, and when he found it, his heart caught in his throat. It was a framed picture of him and his brother. They were young, maybe 8 and 10, sitting in the grass. A big brown dog sprawled across their laps, his tongue out and eyes bright. Murphy, their childhood dog. Evan stared at the photo for a long time. He hadn't thought about Murphy in years. But now, looking at Max curled in the corner, it all came back. The way Murphy used to wait for them after school. The time he tore through the screen door during a thunderstorm just to get close. Dogs didn't forget. They waited, even when it broke their hearts. Evan set the photo near Max's bed. Murphy was my first best friend, he said, not sure why he was speaking aloud. He taught me more about love than most people ever have. Max looked up, and Evan felt it. That same thing he felt when he sat beside Max in the parking lot. That same pull in his chest when Max rested his head on his knee. It wasn't just rescue. It was a reunion of souls that had once been lost. The next morning came quietly. Snowflakes dusted the window. Evan woke before the alarm and glanced down to see Max, not in his bed anymore, but right beside the couch, lying on the floor, guarding him, watching him, waiting, still waiting, but now not for them, for him, for the one who showed up. That day, Evan called the vet. He scheduled Max for a checkup. He bought more food, a new blanket, even a squeaky toy that Max eyed suspiciously but didn't run from. And when night fell again, and the blue toy rested between Max's paws, Evan whispered, You're not alone anymore. Max's eyes closed slowly, not in fear, but in trust. The soft pitter-patter began in the early hours of the morning, long before Evan stirred from his sleep. Rain whispered against the windows, gentle at first, then steadier, heavier, blanketing the city in a gray hush. The kind of rain that didn't scream or crash, but sank into your skin, quiet, persistent, inescapable. Max was already awake, curled near the couch, head resting on his paws. He watched the window with eyes wide open. The sound of water tapping the glass made him tense slightly. His ears perked, flicked back, then forward again. Something inside him remembered rain. Not this rain, not this place, but another rain. A night when water fell from the sky and soaked the fabric of an old blanket inside a cold metal cart. That memory lived under his skin, like an itch he couldn't reach. Evan stirred on the couch, blinking slowly, disoriented for a moment. The weight of a restless night pressed down on his shoulders. He turned to see Max lying still, eyes alert, body coiled in quiet anxiety. "Hey," Evan whispered, swinging his legs over the edge and reaching for his hoodie. "You okay, buddy?" Max didn't move, but his eyes locked onto Evan's face, searching it the way only a dog can, scanning not just for intention, but for meaning, for safety, for assurance. The rain grew louder. A car whooshed by outside, tires slicing through puddles. Max flinched, just slightly. Evan sat down beside him, barefoot on the hardwood floor. He didn't speak right away. He just let his hand rest near Max, not on him, but close enough for Max to make the decision. Max did. Slowly, he moved forward, pressing his head into Evan's hand, as if grounding himself in the now. "You're safe," Evan murmured. "Whatever happened before, that's not here anymore." But trauma doesn't leave when you tell it to. It lingers. After breakfast, Max eating carefully, without rush, still testing his space, Evan decided to try something new. He grabbed the leash from the hook near the door, shaking it lightly. Max looked up, tail giving a single thump. Evan smiled. "Want to go out?" There was no bark, no leap, but Max stood and walked over. His paws clicked softly against the floor, hesitation trailing behind him like a shadow. Outside, the rain hadn't let up. The air smelled like wet pavement and leaves, and a fine mist clung to everything. Evan held the umbrella in one hand, the leash in the other. Max stepped outside but froze at the edge of the building's awning. His paws hit wet concrete, and he recoiled slightly. "It's just rain," Evan said, trying to sound cheerful. Not the end of the world. But to Max, it might as well have been. They didn't walk far, just down the block and back. Evan didn't push him. Max stayed close, tail low, his head swiveling as if expecting the sky to split open. Every drop seemed to stir something deep inside him. Every puddle carried a ghost. When they reached the same bench from yesterday, Max stopped again. This time he didn't freeze. He sat, not facing it, facing away, like he'd made a decision. "I see you," Evan said softly. "You don't have to look back unless you want to." Later that afternoon, the rain turned heavier. A true downpour, the kind that made the building groan and the power flicker. Evan sat by the window, sipping a warm mug of tea. Max lay on the rug nearby, eyes tracking the water streaking down the glass. There was something about the storm that made the apartment feel smaller, more intimate, like the whole world had paused outside and left only the two of them in motion. Evan's phone buzzed. It was his friend Rachel. "Hey, how's the pup doing?" Evan smiled, thumbs tapping back. "He's quiet, still figuring it all out, but he let me walk him today." "Kind of." Another message. "You're doing good work, Ev. Really proud of you." Then a pause. "You've changed. In a good way." Evan read the words twice, then looked at Max, who now snored lightly, curled up beside the heater. Changed. He didn't feel different, but maybe he was. Maybe Max had begun healing something in him, too. As evening approached, the rain softened again. The streets glistened, reflective and empty. Evan decided to make dinner. Nothing fancy, just grilled cheese and soup. Max sat nearby, his nose twitching with every scent. He wasn't begging, just observing. Always observing. Evan made an extra grilled cheese, tore it into pieces, and placed it in Max's bowl beside his kibble. "You earned it," he said. Max sniffed it once, then took a piece gingerly and chewed. And then, for the first time since the shopping cart, he wagged his tail. Just once. But it was real. After dinner, Evan lay on the couch scrolling through adoption articles on his phone. How long does it take for a rescue dog to adjust? Why is my adopted dog afraid of rain? How to help a dog trust again? Every article reminded him there were no perfect answers. Just patience, consistency, love that didn't demand performance. He glanced down. Max was no longer on the rug. He had quietly climbed onto the couch, one paw, then the other, until he lay curled at Evan's side, his head resting gently against his thigh. Evan froze for a second, then slowly, gently, placed his hand on Max's back. "You're brave," he whispered. That night, the power flickered again. The storm had returned with a second wave, wind now howling down the alleyways, rattling the apartment windows. Thunder cracked like splitting bones in the distance. Max jolted up. He stood stiff, tail tucked, his body trembling. Panic flooded his eyes. Not the whimpering kind. The frozen, silent kind. The kind that lives deep in muscle memory. Evan sat up, heart racing. No, hey, it's okay," he said, kneeling beside him. "You're okay. Max, you're here. It's me. I'm here." Max backed away toward the corner, shaking, lost. Evan grabbed the blanket from the couch and knelt beside him, draping it gently over Max's back. He sat down, legs crossed, hands open, heart hurting. "You don't have to be strong right now," he said. "You don't have to be anything. I'll stay right here until it's over." Minutes passed. Lightning flashed outside, but Evan didn't move. Eventually, Max crawled forward, just an inch at first, then another, until his body folded into Evan's lap, head pressed hard into his chest. And then Evan felt it. A sound. A low, muffled, aching sound from Max's throat. Not a growl. Not a bark. A sob. As if something cracked open in him. And all the waiting, all the wondering, all the hope finally poured out. And Evan cried too. Not for Max alone, but for every version of himself that had ever felt abandoned, unwanted, waiting on a bench no one was coming back to. Together, they sat in the storm. And for the first time, neither of them waited alone. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that seeps into the bones, heavy and still, the kind that makes the walls feel smaller, the shadows longer, and the air thicker. Outside, the wind had calmed, leaving only the remnants of the storm, wet streets and lingering clouds, muffling the world. Inside the apartment, Evan sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling absently through his phone. Max lay beside him, curled up into a perfect ball of fur. His breathing was steady now, more relaxed, his tail lightly twitching in his sleep. Evan couldn't help but stare at him. Max wasn't the puppy he had imagined he would adopt. Not the perfect, playful, carefree dog. But that was okay. It was more than okay. It was real. And that was what Evan needed, real. In a world where everything felt like it was falling apart, Max was the one piece that had stayed intact. Evan closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply. He could still smell the remnants of the storm on the air. The earth, the wet leaves, the fresh dampness of rain clinging to everything. He felt grounded here, in this small, silent apartment. He could feel the weight of the day finally lifting, the exhaustion that had built up from the last few days, weeks, maybe months, slowly melting away. Max stirred beside him, his ears twitching at some noise in the distance, but it wasn't enough to wake him. His tiny snores were the only sound in the room. A flash of memory jolted through Evan. He had seen Max, just days ago, abandoned in that cart at the grocery store, trembling, lost in the world. His heart clenched at the thought. How could anyone leave such a sweet creature behind? But Evan hadn't. He had taken Max in, and in doing so, something changed. It wasn't just Max who needed rescuing. Evan had needed it too. The next morning, the sun peeked through the blinds, casting a soft glow across the living room. Evan woke to the sound of soft paws padding across the floor. Max was awake, but he didn't jump onto the couch like Evan expected. Instead, he slowly walked over to the window, his body stiff, cautious, as if unsure of his next step. Evan watched quietly. For a moment, Max sat by the window, his nose pressed against the glass, his ears perked. He was watching something outside, a bird, a car, or maybe just the world going by. His gaze was intense, focused. Evan knew that Max wasn't just watching the world. He was searching for something. Maybe for the family that had left him. Maybe for the boy who had abandoned him in that cart, without a second glance. Max wasn't barking or whining. He wasn't trying to get Evan's attention. He was just there, quietly observing, lost in thought. Evan wanted to go over, to comfort him, to remind him that he was no longer alone, but he hesitated. He knew Max needed this space. After a few minutes, Max turned away from the window, his head hanging low, but his steps were a little less cautious. He walked back to the couch and sat down beside Evan, his body close, but not too close. Max was still unsure, still testing the waters of trust, of safety. But this was progress, small but real. Evan reached down, running his hand through Max's fur. "Hey," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay. You're here now. You don't have to search for them anymore." Max looked up at him, his dark eyes full of confusion, sorrow, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of hope. The days blended together in a blur of quiet moments and steady progress. Max still had his moments of fear. Every time the doorbell rang, he would jump, his tail tucked between his legs, his body stiff. But each time, he came back to Evan's side, finding comfort in his presence. Evan didn't push him. He just let Max take it at his own pace. If Max wanted to be near him, he was there. If Max needed time alone, Evan respected that too. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. A week passed before Evan took Max to the park for the first time. It wasn't much, just a small local park with a few benches and some grass, but it was enough for Max. He hesitated at first, standing at the entrance, his ears flicking nervously. The park was empty except for a few people walking dogs in the distance. The wind rustled through the trees, sending leaves fluttering across the ground. "Come on, buddy," Evan encouraged softly, holding the leash in his hand. "You can do this." Max glanced up at him, uncertainty in his eyes, but there was something new in the way he looked at Evan, a small spark of trust. Slowly, carefully, he took a few steps forward. Max's pace was slow, hesitant, as though he were testing the ground beneath his paws. But he didn't pull away. He followed Evan, step by step. As they walked, Evan kept his eyes on Max, watching how his body shifted, how he slowly began to relax. He wasn't running yet. He wasn't chasing after the squirrels or jumping in excitement like other dogs. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that he was walking. He was moving forward. Evan smiled to himself. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to set and the sky turned soft shades of pink and purple, Evan sat on a bench, watching Max explore the park. He wasn't chasing anything. He wasn't looking for anything. He was simply existing in the moment, his tail wagging slowly behind him, his nose sniffing the air. It was the first time Evan saw Max just be. Not searching, not waiting, just living. And in that moment, Evan realized something. He wasn't just helping Max heal. Max was helping him heal too. Back at home, as the evening descended into twilight, Max curled up in his favorite spot on the rug, his eyes half closed. Evan sat down beside him, running his fingers gently through the soft fur along his back. "You're doing great, Max," Evan whispered. "You're going to be okay." Max's tail gave a soft thump, the first time in days that he had shown even a hint of joy. And for the first time, Evan felt a sense of peace settle over him. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know how to make Max forget the past. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to give up on him. Max had waited for someone to show up. And now Evan was there. He wasn't going anywhere. As the night deepened, Evan sat in the quiet, a sense of calm washing over him. Max's soft breathing was the only sound in the room. The journey wasn't over, but it had just begun. The days grew shorter, and the air grew colder as winter's grip tightened around the city. Evan could feel it, the change in the air, the quiet shift in Max's demeanor. The puppy who had once trembled at every sound was now growing accustomed to the rhythm of their life together. Max had begun to run across the apartment with more confidence, his tail wagging furiously when he chased after his favorite toy. He'd even started sleeping on the bed with Evan, curling up at the foot of it like he belonged there. But it wasn't just Max who was changing. Evan, too, was shifting. He was becoming someone he hadn't realized he needed to be. That morning, as Evan sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee, Max padded over and sat beside him, his eyes looking up expectantly. It wasn't often Max asked for anything directly, but when he did, Evan made sure to listen. "What is it, buddy?" Evan asked, scratching behind Max's ears. Max's tail gave a soft thump against the floor, and he nudged his nose into Evan's hand. There was something about the way Max looked at him, a quiet plea in his eyes that was hard to ignore. Evan smiled gently and stood up, walking over to the closet. He grabbed the leash and hooked it onto Max's collar. "All right, let's go for a walk," he said, his voice warm. The cold air hit Evan's face as they stepped outside, but it didn't bother him. Max, however, immediately shivered, and Evan tightened his grip on the leash. He hadn't realized just how much the weather had turned. The park they visited every day was already beginning to gather a light dusting of snow, the grass barely visible beneath the white blanket. Max was more hesitant today, his paws slipping on the icy ground. Evan could feel the tension in the leash as Max carefully stepped forward, his legs unsteady beneath him. For a moment, Evan stood still, waiting for Max to find his footing. Max's eyes met his, and in that look, there was an understanding. Max was afraid, but he wasn't alone anymore. He had Evan. Evan crouched down, meeting Max at eye level. "It's okay, buddy. You're safe now," he said softly, his voice filled with reassurance. Max didn't bark. He didn't pull away. He simply looked back at Evan and took a step forward, moving toward the path. Evan stood up and walked beside him, careful to match Max's slow pace. They didn't need words. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with something unspoken but deeply understood. Evan had never been one to speak much, but with Max, he didn't need to. The dog had become a presence in his life, as necessary as the air he breathed. The walk wasn't long, and Max's movements were slow, almost deliberate. Each step was measured, each one more careful than the last. Evan noticed how Max's eyes darted to the trees, the snowflakes drifting lazily down, the sounds of distant traffic. But he wasn't panicked anymore. He wasn't searching for something he couldn't find. For the first time in weeks, Max was at peace. They made their way to a small bench near the park's edge, and Evan sat down, letting Max rest beside him. It was cold, but they didn't care. Time seemed to slow down around them. As they sat there, Evan thought back to the first time he had seen Max. The little puppy abandoned in the shopping cart. The way he had stared at the world with a look of confusion, fear, and an almost heartbreaking sense of hope. Evan had been struck by the quiet sadness in his eyes, but now, looking at him, he saw something different. Max was no longer waiting for someone to come back. He was no longer the lost puppy in the cart. He was Max. He was Evan's companion. And in this moment, they were both exactly where they needed to be. When they returned home, Max's paws were caked with snow, and Evan wiped them down carefully with a towel. Max stood still, his eyes closed as Evan gently rubbed him down. Max seemed content, but there was a quietness about him that was hard to ignore. He wasn't his usual playful self, but Evan understood. The world was still a scary place for him, and it would take time for Max to fully trust again. But that didn't scare Evan. He knew the puppy wasn't broken, just wounded. Max had a long way to go, but they had time. Later that evening, as the snow continued to fall outside, Max curled up on the couch next to Evan. Evan was lost in thought, flipping through channels on the TV, but not really watching. He was thinking about Max, about how far he had come since that first night. But more than that, he was thinking about how much he still had to give, how much love he had to offer. He thought about the boy who had left Max behind. He wondered what had happened, what had made the boy walk away. He couldn't imagine ever abandoning a dog like Max, who had so much to offer. But the thought lingered. The boy had his reasons, just as Max had his. Perhaps that was why Max was so special. He wasn't just an animal. He was a survivor, a testament to the power of second chances. Evan's heart tightened at the thought. He was lucky. He hadn't just adopted a puppy. He had gained a partner, a friend, a companion, a reminder that the world still had beauty and tenderness in it. Max stretched beside him, his paw brushing against Evan's leg. He looked up at him, eyes soft, tail giving a gentle thump against the couch. "You ready for bed?" Evan asked, rubbing his ears. Max didn't respond in the usual playful way, but he nuzzled into Evan's side, and Evan took that as his answer. Evan turned off the lights and climbed into bed, Max curling up next to him as he always did now. The warmth of the dog beside him was comforting, and for the first time in a long time, Evan felt a deep sense of peace. Max woke first, as he often did, his eyes wide and alert in the dark room. He stretched, yawning before climbing off the bed. Evan stirred, the early morning light just beginning to peek through the curtains. Max padded over to the window, his nose gently pushing against the glass as he looked outside. Evan watched him, wondering what the dog was thinking. Maybe he was waiting for something. Maybe he was remembering the past. But in that moment, Max wasn't searching anymore. He was home. As the days passed, Evan and Max continued to grow together, their bond deepening. The puppy who had once been abandoned in a shopping cart had now become a beloved part of Evan's life. Max had found his place, and so had Evan. The journey wasn't over, but it had come full circle. Max was no longer waiting for someone to come back, and neither was Evan. They had both arrived, together. The chill in the late afternoon air clung to Evan's jacket as he zipped it up, peering out the frosted window. Snowflakes lazily spiraled down, landing softly on the sidewalk, like the quiet touch of memories, too heavy to speak aloud. Inside the apartment, Max, no longer just a frightened puppy, but still unmistakably fragile, was curled up on the couch, the blue stuffed toy still clasped between his front paws. It had been weeks now since that fateful day at the grocery store, since Evan found the trembling German Shepherd puppy in a shopping cart, left with no note, no explanation. And while Max had grown healthier physically, at least, Evan still caught glimpses of the ache in his eyes. That silent hope, the same kind of waiting Evan had once known too well. That afternoon, Evan sat beside Max and gently stroked his fur. The dog stirred, lifting his head and blinking sleepily. His ears perked up slightly. "You want to go for a ride?" Evan asked softly. Max tilted his head, then slowly rose to his feet. He padded over to the door, tail wagging faintly. Evan smiled. It was a small thing, but a signal. Max was beginning to trust the world again. They pulled into the parking lot of the animal shelter, a small but welcoming place tucked between a church and a used bookstore. Evan had called ahead. He didn't know why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe a quiet need to know if someone had reported a missing puppy. A part of him still wondered if Max had a boy, a family, someone desperately looking for him. Inside, the shelter smelled of sanitizer, pine cleaner, and dog fur. The front desk was manned by an older woman with warm eyes and silver-streaked hair. Her name tag read, Darla Volunteer. She looked up and smiled. "You must be Evan." Evan nodded, tightening his hold on Max's leash. "Yeah, this is Max." Max stood quietly beside him, not barking, not trembling, but his stance was alert, tense, like he knew where they were. The echo of past traumas clung to his steps like shadows. Darla came around the desk and knelt down, letting Max sniff her hand. "Well, aren't you a beautiful boy?" she said gently. Max gave her a cautious sniff, then looked back at Evan. He was found in a shopping cart. "No microchip, no collar," Evan explained. His voice hushed. Darla stood up, her smile fading slightly. "That's happening more than you'd think lately. People falling on hard times, families making impossible choices." Evan swallowed hard. "I just wanted to see if maybe someone had reported him missing. If someone might be looking." She walked to the computer and typed a few things. As she clicked through the files, Max sat beside Evan, eyes scanning the small waiting room. "No missing pet reports matching that description in the last 2 months," Darla said softly. "But," Evan looked up. Darla hesitated. "There was something. A woman came in about 3 weeks ago with her son. He was about 10. She was crying. Said they had to move into a shelter and couldn't keep their dog. She brought in his leash and his toy. Said he was taken away before she could get him." Max suddenly tensed beside Evan. The moment the word toy was spoken, he stood, alert and almost searching. Evan blinked. His toy. Darla nodded. Blue. Torn ear. I kept it just in case someone claimed him. You said Max had a blue toy, right? Evan's heart thudded in his chest. Yeah, it was in the cart with him. Darla disappeared into the back room and returned moments later, holding the small object in a clear bag. It was nearly identical, tattered and stained, but unmistakably the same type of toy Max never let out of his sight. Max whined, a soft, heartbreaking sound. Evan crouched beside him and took the toy from Darla. He held it out, and Max gently took it, walking a few steps away and curling around it like it was the last piece of a world he'd lost. Darla sat down across from Evan. That boy, he cried so hard, Evan. He didn't want to leave him behind. Said he was his best friend. That his name was Max. The name hung in the air. I guess I didn't name him after all, Evan whispered, watching Max lick the toy tenderly, protectively. Darla nodded. No, but you reminded him what it feels like to be loved again. That evening, Evan and Max sat in the quiet of the apartment. The snow outside had blanketed the city in white. Street lights flickered like beacons, casting halos onto the empty sidewalks. Evan couldn't stop thinking about the boy. What he must have felt, what he must have gone through, carrying that guilt, leaving Max behind, not even knowing what had happened to him. He pulled out his phone, opened the Notes app, and began typing. To the boy who loved Max. I found him. He was scared, cold, and alone, but he held onto that toy like it was a lifeline. I didn't know his name until today, but I knew he was waiting for someone. Waiting for you. He's safe now. Loved. I don't know if this will ever reach you, but I need you to know. You didn't fail him. You gave him enough love to wait, and I'm trying every day to be the kind of person he deserves. If you ever want to see him again, I'll make sure he remembers. He hit save, but didn't post it anywhere. Not yet, but it was there, waiting for the right moment, just like Max had. The morning light crept gently through the frosted windows of Evan's apartment, casting soft golden beams onto the hardwood floor. Max lay curled beside the door, his head resting on his paws, unmoving except for the occasional flick of an ear. Evan watched him from across the room, coffee growing cold in his hands. The blue plush toy, now patched and clean, sat next to Max like a piece of his past he refused to let go of. Evan's heart ached. The story behind Max, found in that shopping cart, the way he waited in silence, his eyes scanning every stranger, wasn't just about abandonment. It was about love. A boy's love. A boy who had given up his best friend, but left behind a piece of his heart in that blue toy. Evan had to do something. That morning, as snow began to melt into slush along the sidewalks, he clipped the leash onto Max's collar and tucked the toy into his backpack. Let's go, buddy, he whispered. Maybe today we find him. Instead of turning toward the park or their usual morning route, Evan headed for the community school 2 blocks away, the one the shelter volunteer had mentioned. It was a long shot. The boy and his mother hadn't been back. No name, no address, just a heartbreaking visit and the memory of a child asking about a missing dog. The school loomed ahead, a 2-story brick building with weathered steps and colorful murals on its walls. Children's laughter echoed from the playground as recess came to an end. The sounds made Max lift his head. His ears twitched. His tail slowly wagged. Something in the air felt familiar to him. They entered the main office together. The warmth inside was a stark contrast to the winter outside. The scent of markers, books, and cafeteria food lingered in the air. A woman behind the desk looked up from her screen, startled. Oh, sir, I'm sorry, but... I know dogs aren't allowed, Evan said gently. I'm not here to cause a problem. I found this German Shepherd puppy abandoned a few weeks ago. I've been fostering him. The shelter said a boy came here asking about a lost dog. This dog, I think. He had a blue toy with him. Max hasn't let go of it since. The receptionist's expression changed. Her posture softened. A German Shepherd? Yes, I remember now. Sweet kid. Quiet. Maybe 10. His mom was crying outside while he asked me if anyone had brought in a dog. He held this torn-up blue plush bone. I'll never forget his face when I said no. Max let out a soft, questioning whine, as if he could sense who they were talking about. Is there any way I could find out who he is? Evan asked. The receptionist bit her lip. We're not really allowed to share student info. But wait here. She disappeared down a hallway, leaving Evan and Max alone in the warm, silent office. Max sat upright, alert. He looked toward the hallway and tilted his head. Minutes passed. Then a door opened, and a teacher stepped out, an older woman with graying hair and kind eyes. She didn't look directly at Max. She looked at the toy sticking out of Evan's backpack. That's the toy, she said softly. That's his dog. Evan nodded, heart pounding. Do you know where they went? The teacher sighed. They didn't have stable housing. The mom had just lost her job. They were in a temporary shelter. A week later, someone said they'd been placed in a family support center out of town. No forwarding address. Evan felt a sharp pang in his chest. So close, yet so far. The teacher looked down at Max, who was now sitting patiently, tail wagging. That boy, he loved this dog more than anything. He cried when he told me. Said he hoped Max would forgive him. That one day, Max would understand. Evan swallowed hard. He never stopped waiting. Even after I took him in, he still waited. The teacher knelt slowly. Max leaned forward, sniffed her hand, and licked it gently. She smiled through tears. He's still holding on, she whispered. Then she stood and pointed toward a classroom door with a glass window. There's something I want to show you. They walked over together. Through the glass, Evan saw a wall of drawings, crayon pictures taped side by side, and right in the center was one that stopped him cold, a boy holding the paw of a German shepherd. Both were smiling. Above it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Best friends always." Evan stared at it, his throat tightening. Max, too, stared at the drawing, ears up, tail softly swaying. That's his, the teacher said. He drew it every morning he came back to ask, even when we had no updates. Do you know his name? Evan asked, barely managing the words. The teacher hesitated. His name's Caleb. I wish I could tell you more. But even if we can't find him right now, maybe he'll come back. Evan nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the drawing. If he does, tell him Max never gave up. As they left the school, the snow had stopped falling. The air smelled clean, like something new had begun. Evan looked down at Max. You remembered him, didn't you? That playground. Those voices. Max looked up at Evan, eyes soft, trusting. And as they walked back home, there was a different kind of silence between them. Not the silence of waiting anymore, but of understanding, of hope. Back at the apartment, the quiet didn't feel quite as heavy anymore. Evan unhooked Max's leash and set his keys down. The familiar sound of the door clicking shut echoed behind them, but Max didn't retreat to his usual spot near the mat. Instead, he walked slowly to the center of the room, blue toy gently gripped in his mouth, and laid it at Evan's feet. Evan knelt, petting the German shepherd puppy between the ears. You really remember him, don't you? Max didn't make a sound. He just pressed his head into Evan's chest. That night, Evan couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Caleb, this boy who had lost everything, and still somehow had the strength to love enough to let go. Evan imagined him drawing that picture, day after day, putting hope into crayons, because that's all he had. He imagined the weight of his mother's silence, the way she must have wiped her tears and told her son they had to move on, even when his heart hadn't. Evan stared at the ceiling for hours, and then an idea. He sat up and reached for his laptop. The next morning, Evan arrived at the shelter early. Max walked beside him, alert but calm. They were met by Hannah, the same volunteer who had first told Evan about the mysterious boy asking about a lost dog. Her eyes widened when she saw Max. Wow, he looks different. Evan smiled. He's healing. Still waiting, but healing. I can tell. So, what brings you both here? I have a proposal, Evan said, but I'll need your help. He pulled out a small, folded piece of paper from his coat pocket and handed it to her. It was a flyer. At the top was a sketch of Max, drawn from memory, and just beneath it the title, The Boy Who Loved a Dog. Below it was a message, to the boy who left a German shepherd puppy in a shopping cart. He never stopped waiting. He's safe now. And if you're still looking for him, we're looking for you. Hannah read it slowly. Her lips trembled. This is beautiful. I want to post these, Evan said. In schools, shelters, grocery stores, anywhere someone might recognize him. Maybe we can find Caleb. And if not, maybe the story reaches him somehow. Hannah nodded, already blinking back tears. I'll make copies. That same day, Evan posted the first flyer in the school office, with the principal's permission. Another went up at the community center bulletin board. He handed them to local cafes, pinned them on telephone poles, slid one under the door of the family shelter where Caleb and his mother once stayed. Everywhere he went, Max came with him, wearing a simple blue ribbon around his collar, just like the one Caleb had drawn in the picture. And with every poster, every stranger who stopped to look and read, the story began to spread. People began taking pictures of the flyer and posting it online. One woman wrote, "Saw this at the market. Had me crying in the frozen foods aisle. Whoever this boy is, I hope he finds his dog." Another said, "My daughter goes to the same school. She remembers Caleb. Said he always carried a toy bone in his backpack. This is him. Has to be." Soon, a local news reporter reached out to Evan for an interview. He hesitated at first, not wanting to exploit Max's pain, but then he thought about Caleb. If it was his only chance to find him, maybe it was worth it. The segment aired that weekend, a soft-spoken piece titled, "A Puppy Waits, A Boy's Love Remains." It featured Evan holding Max in his lap, the blue toy bone resting between them. In the video, Evan said quietly, "He never barked. He never cried. He just waited. If you're out there, Caleb, he remembers you. He forgives you. And he's waiting still." That single line caught fire online. The comments rolled in by the thousands. "I haven't cried like this in years. This boy loved deeper than most adults ever do. I hope the world gives Caleb and Max the happy ending they deserve." Weeks passed, and something changed. People didn't just share the story, they did something. Teachers began reading the story aloud in class. Students drew pictures of dogs and posted them on lockers with hopeful messages. Love waits. Love forgives. A children's author contacted Evan asking for permission to write a book inspired by Max and Caleb's story. And Max, he started changing too. He played more. He began wagging his tail when he heard kids laugh. He sat patiently beside the flyers when Evan posted new ones, as if he understood. As if he knew this wasn't the end of his story, just the middle. One evening, after hanging a flyer in a small bookstore window, Evan looked down and saw Max staring at his own reflection in the glass. His ears perked. He licked the window gently. "I know, buddy," Evan whispered. "I feel him too." Back home that night, Evan sat by the window, scrolling through messages and emails from strangers. One in particular stood out. It was short, just a few lines. "I think I know who Caleb is. I'm not sure where they are now, but I was in the shelter with them. I remember the dog. I remember the toy. If I can help, I will." Evan's hands trembled. He replied instantly, heart pounding with hope. The next morning, Max sat by the door, tail wagging. It was the first time he'd waited not in silence, but in hope, because for the first time in a long time, something felt different in the air. Not just the weight of waiting, but the whisper of reunion. Evan didn't sleep that night. The message from the girl, who remembered Caleb, stirred something deep inside him. He sat at his desk, phone in hand, reading it over and over. "I think I know who Caleb is. I'm not sure where they are now, but I was in the shelter with them. I remember the dog. I remember the toy. If I can help, I will." Her name was Jasmine, 14 years old. She'd been in and out of shelters most of her life, and had crossed paths with Caleb and his mother for just a few days. But even now, she remembered the way Caleb clutched the toy dog when he thought no one was watching, the way he whispered to it, hugged it like it was real. It wasn't just a toy, she wrote. He talked to it like it was alive, like it was his whole world. Evan responded right away. They agreed to meet at the shelter, where she now volunteered part-time. The next morning, Evan arrived with Max. Jasmine was waiting outside. She had her hoodie pulled up, arms wrapped around herself tightly. Not from cold, but something else. Shyness, maybe. Hesitation. The kind of posture that said she was used to not being noticed. Max approached her gently, tail wagging. "Oh, wow," she said, kneeling instinctively. "He looks just like—" "Like the drawing?" Evan asked softly. She nodded. "Yeah, but calmer. Sadder too." Evan knelt beside her. "Jasmine, if you remember anything, where they went, what his mom said, it could really help." Jasmine looked up, eyes uncertain. "I don't know for sure. But one night, I heard his mom talking to the shelter director. She was crying. She said she was taking a bus to her sister's house, somewhere 2 towns over. Said it was only temporary, but they couldn't bring the dog." She paused. Caleb didn't know. She waited until he was asleep. Took the dog out in the early morning, while he was still dreaming. Evan's heart sank. He looked at Max, who had sat beside Jasmine and was now resting his head in her lap. He must have thought Max just ran away. Evan whispered. "No," Jasmine said. "That's the thing." He knew. Somehow. He kept saying. She didn't run. She waited. She's waiting. I think he believed Max would come back. Evan felt his throat tighten. He thanked Jasmine, took her contact info, and promised to keep her updated. Before he left, Jasmine pulled something from her backpack. "I don't know why I kept this," she said, "but Caleb gave it to me the night before they left. Said he didn't need it anymore." It was a drawing. Crayons. Faded and folded. A picture of Caleb sitting on a bench, holding Max. Around the dog's neck was the blue ribbon. Above the picture were the words, "She didn't leave me. She's just lost. I'll find her." Evan stared at it, overcome. "Thank you," he whispered. He and Max drove straight to the address Jasmine remembered the mom saying. It was a small town about an hour away. Quieter than the city, but just as cold that winter day. They stopped at the only shelter in the area. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with soft eyes, listened to Evan's story in silence. "Do you have a photo of the boy?" she asked. "I only have the drawing," Evan replied. He pulled it out, gently placing it on the counter. The woman stared at it for a long time. "I remember them. Caleb and his mom. They stayed here for 2 weeks. Real quiet. She was trying to get back on her feet. He was sweet, always talking about a dog he lost. Wouldn't stop drawing." Evan leaned forward. "Do you know where they went?" She nodded slowly. "Last I heard, they got placed into transitional housing. It's a small place on the edge of town. I can call someone, get the address." Evan's heart beat faster. Please. That would mean everything. The apartment complex was modest, white siding, a rusty swing set out front. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue across the snow-dusted grass. Evan parked. Max jumped down beside him, tail still, but his ears twitching. They approached the door the woman had written down for them. Unit 4B. Evan hesitated. What if Caleb didn't remember? What if he'd moved on, convinced himself the puppy he loved was lost forever? What if his mother didn't want to reopen old wounds? He was about to knock when Max stepped forward, nose pressed to the door, tail swaying once. And then a sound. Footsteps inside. A lock turning. The door opened slowly. A woman stood there. Tired eyes. Kind, but worn down by life. She looked at Evan, confused at first, and then her gaze dropped to Max. Her breath caught. Max didn't bark. He didn't whimper. He just sat. Still. Waiting. The woman brought a hand to her mouth. "No," she whispered. "It can't be." A voice from inside. "Mom. Who's there?" And then, a boy appeared. 12. Thin frame. Curly hair. Big eyes. The second he saw Max, he stopped breathing. His backpack fell from his shoulder. "Lily." Max rose. Walked forward slowly. Tail wagging now, not fast, but steady, like a heartbeat remembered. Caleb dropped to his knees. Max rushed into his arms. And for the first time in what felt like forever, both boy and dog let themselves cry. The mother knelt beside them. Her hands trembled as she stroked Max's back. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know he'd wait like this." Evan knelt, quiet tears in his eyes. He never stopped. They stayed like that for a long time. 3 souls, once broken, now whole again. Not just a reunion. A homecoming. The warmth inside Unit 4B was a sharp contrast to the bitter wind that had chased Evan and Max through the streets just minutes before. But it wasn't the heater or the walls that made it warm. It was the reunion. It was Caleb's arms around Max, his soft sobs muffled in Max's fur. It was the way Max leaned into him, like he'd never left, like no time had passed. Evan sat quietly on a worn armchair, taking it all in. Caleb's mother, Maria, moved about the small space. Her hands were shaking as she poured water into a kettle, her eyes constantly drifting back to her son and the dog he once loved and lost. "You really don't know how much this means," she said, finally breaking the silence. Evan looked up. "I think I do." She smiled faintly. "I'm sorry, what's your name again?" "Evan. Evan Price. I'm the one who found Max." "Well, Max found me." Her eyes welled up again, and she sat down across from him at the small kitchen table. "When I left her at that store, it was the worst day of my life." Evan tilted his head. Maria smiled softly, looking toward the dog. "Caleb always called her Lily, after his favorite book. But I guess you named her Max." Evan nodded slowly. "I didn't know her name, but I guess she was waiting to hear it again from him." Maria's gaze drifted to the couch, where Caleb and Lily, no Max, lay curled up together. Caleb's arms were still wrapped around her neck, and though his tears had stopped, his grip hadn't loosened. He looked exhausted, but peaceful. "Why did you leave her?" Evan finally asked. "If you don't mind me asking." Maria sighed. The whistle of the kettle shrieked behind her, but she didn't move. "I had no choice," she said. "We were bouncing between shelters. I'd just gotten a call from my sister. She said we could stay, but only if it was just the two of us. She has allergies, and a dog wasn't an option. I thought it would only be for a few days, that maybe someone kind would find her." Evan listened, watching the pain dance across her features. "But when we left, Caleb knew," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could keep it from him, tell him she ran off or got lost. But he just looked at me and said, 'She's waiting. I'll find her again.' He wouldn't let it go. He drew pictures of her every day, talked to her toy at night. He believed she was out there." "She was," Evan said. Maria's eyes snapped to his. "You really don't know what this means. To both of us." Evan gave a small smile. "Honestly, it means something to me, too." She looked puzzled. "I found her in a shopping cart, alone, holding a chewed-up toy in her mouth," he said. "I don't know why I stopped that day. I wasn't planning to. I had things to do, a whole life to live. But she looked at me like I was the one being rescued." Maria covered her mouth again, blinking back fresh tears. "She never barked. She never cried. She just waited," Evan said. "I think she believed Caleb would come for her, even if it took forever." Silence settled over the room like snowfall. Soft, heavy, healing. Eventually, Caleb stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment he looked around, as if expecting to wake up from a dream. But Max was still there. Her ears perked, her eyes fixed on him. "Mom," Caleb asked, his voice raw and quiet. Maria rose instantly and sat beside him. She reached for his hand. "Yeah, baby," she said. "I'm here." He looked from her to Max, then to Evan. "Is this real?" he asked. Evan knelt beside him. "As real as it gets." Tears rolled down the boy's cheeks again, but this time they weren't filled with confusion or fear. They were relief. Overwhelming, soul-deep relief. "You found her?" Caleb asked. "No," Evan said, shaking his head. "She found me. And then you found her." Caleb hugged Max tighter. "I never stopped believing she was out there." Maria ran her fingers through her son's curls. "I know, sweetheart. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you the truth. I thought it would hurt less that way." Caleb didn't respond, but his hand reached out and took hers. Forgiveness, wordless and pure. "I still have her toy," he whispered. "It's in my drawer. I talk to it sometimes." "Would you like to give it back to her?" Evan asked. Caleb nodded. He slipped off the couch and ran to his small room. He returned a moment later with the blue chew toy, torn and faded now, but unmistakably hers. When Max saw it, her ears perked, and she stood slowly, tail sweeping across the rug. Caleb dropped it in front of her. "Remember this?" he said, his voice cracking. Max sniffed it, licked it once, then nudged it toward him, like she was giving it back. "No," Caleb said, gently pushing it to her again. "It's yours." She picked it up in her mouth and laid beside him once more. Maria wiped her eyes. "She didn't forget," she whispered. Evan smiled. "Dogs don't forget, especially not love." They spent the rest of the evening together, laughing, remembering, and just being present in a way that only reunion allows. Evan told them about Max's days, waiting by the shopping cart, about how people ignored her, how she never left that spot. Maria shook her head in disbelief. She waited there that whole time. "Every day," Evan said, "even when it snowed." "But why a shopping cart?" Caleb asked. Maria winced. "That's where I left her." Evan nodded. "She stayed. She believed you'd return." "I would have," Caleb said fiercely, "if I'd known." Max nudged his side gently, almost as if to say, "It's okay. I'm here now." Later that night, as Evan stood to leave, Maria walked him to the door. "I don't have much," she said, voice low, "but if there's any way I can repay you." "You already did," Evan replied. "You raised a boy who never stopped believing in love." She smiled, tears shining again. "We'd love to stay in touch," he said. "We'd love that too." Caleb ran up and hugged Evan tightly. "Thank you for finding her." Evan hugged him back. "Take care of each other, okay?" "We will," Caleb promised. As Evan stepped out into the cold night, he turned back one last time. Max sat at the door beside Caleb. The boy waved. The dog wagged her tail. And for the first time in a long time, Evan felt like the world had made sense again. The next few days passed like a dream for Caleb. Every morning, he woke up to the soft warmth of Max curled at the foot of his bed, her tail giving a sleepy wag when his eyes opened. It was like they had never been apart. Only now, things were different, brighter. There was no longer a hole in his chest when he walked past the empty leash hook by the door. No longer that ache in his heart when he touched the blue chew toy that had lived in his drawer like a secret hope. Max was here. She was real. And she wasn't going anywhere. For the first time in a long time, Caleb didn't drag his feet on the way to school. His backpack no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a purpose. Like maybe he could face the world again because the part of him that had been missing was finally home. His mom noticed it too. Maria had started smiling more. Not just the tired, polite smiles she gave to cashiers and neighbors, but real ones. The kind that came from the heart. She sang when she cooked breakfast. She opened the curtains again. She even started wearing earrings, something she hadn't done since before they lost the house. It was like Max had brought sunlight into their apartment. Not just with her presence, but with the hope she carried like a spark in her eyes. Maria still had her worries, of course. Rent, work, stability. But they seemed just a little more manageable now, because love had returned to their home in the form of a loyal, gentle German shepherd puppy. And one morning, as Caleb was tying his shoes, Max gently brought him her leash. "You want to come?" he asked, laughing. She tilted her head, ears perked, eyes locked on his face. Maria glanced over from the stove. "I think she wants to walk you to school." "Can she?" he asked, eyes wide with excitement. Maria hesitated. They didn't have a proper leash. Just the makeshift one Evan had given them, a piece of knotted rope. They didn't have a license tag yet, or money for shots. But when she looked at Max's eager expression and Caleb's hopeful face, she couldn't say no. "Just this once," she said, "and only to the crosswalk." Caleb grinned. "Thanks, Mom." Max danced in a small circle, tail swishing so fast it made the air whistle. The walk to school was short, but it felt like an adventure. Caleb held the rope leash like it was the string to a balloon, and Max trotted proudly at his side, her nose twitching with every new smell. Kids on the sidewalk stopped and stared. Some smiled. Others whispered. "Is that a police dog?" one asked. "No," Caleb said, puffing out his chest a little. "She's my best friend." When they reached the corner, Caleb knelt down and hugged Max tight. "I'll be back soon," he whispered in her ear. She licked his cheek and sat obediently beside his mom. Maria watched her son cross the street, a lump in her throat. This was how it should have been all along. After school, Caleb burst through the door, cheeks flushed, eyes shining. "Mom, you'll never guess." "What?" she asked, startled. "I told my teacher about Max, and she said maybe, we could bring her to class for reading time." Maria blinked. "Reading time?" "Yeah, we take turns reading out loud, and sometimes therapy dogs come in to help kids who get nervous. Miss Hardy said Max might be perfect." Maria hesitated. "But she's not trained." "Not really." Caleb nodded. "I know, but Miss Hardy said we could just try it. Just once, and she'd stay right next to us." Max patted over and placed her head gently on Caleb's knee, as if she knew what he was saying. Maria smiled. Well, maybe. It was all the permission Caleb needed. He spent the whole evening preparing. He brushed Max's fur until it gleamed. He found the cleanest shirt he owned. He picked out his favorite book, The Lost Dog's Journey, and practiced the first few pages out loud. When the day finally arrived, Caleb held Max's leash with pride as they walked into the classroom. The room quieted the moment they entered. Kids' eyes widened. Some whispered. One girl clutched her notebook to her chest. Miss Hardy stepped forward. "Class, this is Max. She's here to help us with our reading today." Max didn't bark or jump. She simply sat beside Caleb, calm and alert. The teacher guided Caleb to a chair in front of the room. Max laid at his feet. Caleb opened his book, hands trembling. "Take your time," Miss Hardy said softly. He looked down at Max. She blinked up at him, and it was like she gave him permission, like she reminded him he wasn't alone. He began to read. His voice shook at first, but Max didn't move. And slowly, his words grew stronger, clearer. By the time he reached the second page, the classroom was silent, not with boredom, but with wonder. It was the first time Caleb had spoken that much in front of anyone. When he finished, Max stood and rested her head on his lap. The entire room erupted in applause. Even Miss Hardy's eyes glistened. "That was beautiful," she said. "Thank you, Caleb. And thank you, Max." For the rest of the day, kids took turns coming over to pet Max. Some read to her softly. One girl, who hadn't spoken much all year, whispered a whole paragraph from her book just to Max. And Max listened like each word was sacred. Miss Hardy approached Maria later that day. "I think your dog might have a gift," she said. Maria blinked. "A gift?" "She brought something into that room today. Calm. Connection. You should think about getting her certified. Therapy dogs do amazing things." Maria looked at Max, curled up beside Caleb in the corner of the room. "She already has." Back at home, Evan visited again that evening. He brought a box of toys, a proper leash, and a brand new collar with Max's name engraved on the tag. Maria hugged him. "You're part of this family now, you know." Evan smiled. "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." That night, as Caleb tucked Max into her bed beside his, he whispered, "We're going to help people, you and me." Max licked his hand, her eyes glowing in the dark. Outside, the wind howled, but inside all was warm, and healing had truly begun. The morning sunlight broke through the thin curtains of Caleb's bedroom, casting soft golden stripes across the floor. Max, his loyal German shepherd puppy, stirred at the foot of the bed, her ears twitching as Caleb blinked awake. For a brief moment, he just stared at the ceiling, a slow smile tugging at his lips. Life had changed, completely, and Max was the heartbeat of that change. From the moment she entered his life, things hadn't just gotten better, they'd become meaningful. His words mattered. His voice had power. His heart didn't feel heavy anymore. And for the first time, he wanted to speak not just for himself, but for others, especially those who couldn't. Max jumped off the bed and padded over to him, tail wagging softly. "You ready?" Caleb asked, rubbing her ears. Max leaned into his hand as if to say, always. Today wasn't just any day. Caleb was going to speak in front of the entire school, an assembly organized by his teacher, Miss Hardy, and the principal, who had been deeply moved by the story of Max's rescue. But Caleb didn't just want to tell his story. He wanted to make a difference. At breakfast, Maria adjusted the collar on Max's neck and handed Caleb the note cards he'd worked on all week. "You sure about this?" she asked. He nodded, his fingers nervously fiddling with the edges of the cards. "She helped me find my voice," he said. "Now I want to use it for others like her." Maria leaned down and kissed the top of his head. "I'm proud of you, Caleb. No matter what." Evan arrived just in time, holding a small plastic badge. "Look what I picked up yesterday," he said, handing it to Caleb. It was a laminated ID that read, "Max, official therapy dog in training." Caleb's eyes went wide with joy. "We really are doing it, huh?" "You're doing it," Evan said. "Max just lights the way." The auditorium buzzed with excitement as students filled the rows of seats. Posters of animals lined the walls, adoption slogans, pictures of shelter dogs, and quotes about compassion. Miss Hardy had gone above and beyond, turning the event into something bigger than a speech. It had become a call to action. Principal Dawson stepped up to the podium first. "Today we welcome a special guest, not just a student, but a voice for animals who need our help. Please welcome Caleb and his friend Max." The applause was thunderous. Caleb walked up slowly, Max at his side. The moment they reached the center of the stage, Max sat at attention, eyes scanning the room calmly. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest. He looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some skeptical, but all watching him. He took a deep breath, fingers gripping his note cards. "My name is Caleb," he began, "and this is Max. Some of you might know her already. She wasn't always this happy. She was abandoned in a shopping cart, with nothing but a torn toy. She didn't bark. She didn't whine. She just waited, hoping someone would come back." The room fell silent. My mom and I had lost almost everything. We were barely holding on. And then Max came into our lives, and everything changed. Not just for us, but for people around us too. She's helped my mom smile again, helped me speak in class, helped a girl in my class read out loud for the first time in months, all by just being there. He paused, then looked down at Max, who gave him a slow, reassuring blink. "There are so many animals like Max," Caleb continued, his voice growing stronger. "Waiting in shelters, waiting in streets, waiting in parking lots and doorways, and, yes, shopping carts. They don't have a voice, but we do." A few students sniffled quietly. Teachers exchanged looks. "That's why I want to start something," Caleb said, lifting a small handmade sign. "A club, the Voice for the Voiceless Club, where we help shelter animals get adopted, where we raise money for food and medicine, where we go visit them, talk to them, walk them, where we remind people they matter." He glanced at the principal. "Mr. Dawson said we could meet once a week in the library, and Miss Hardy said she'd help. And Max, well, she'll be there too." The room erupted in applause. Not polite, not restrained, but heartfelt, thunderous, and full of meaning. Caleb wasn't just a quiet boy anymore. He was a leader. Later that afternoon, in the small library room tucked near the back of the school, the very first meeting of the Voice for the Voiceless Club began. There were only 6 students at first: Caleb, a shy girl named Molly, a tall boy named Marcus, 2 quiet 6th graders, and Max, lying in the center like a guardian angel. But it was enough. They made posters. They brainstormed fundraiser ideas. Caleb suggested a school-wide pet picture day, where students would bring photos of their pets or animals they loved to pin on a wall of compassion. Molly suggested a donation drive for the local shelter. Marcus offered to build a website. Max moved from child to child, resting her head on laps, offering gentle encouragement just by being present. It was the beginning of something much bigger than any of them realized. That night, Maria tucked Caleb into bed. She sat on the edge, looking at him thoughtfully. "You were amazing today." He blushed. "I was scared." "That's what makes it brave," she said. "Doing it anyway." He smiled, reaching down to scratch Max behind her ears. She made it easier. Maria nodded. "She's special. But you're something else entirely." As she stood to leave, Caleb looked up. "Do you think someday I could help train dogs like Max?" Maria turned, caught off guard. "I mean dogs that need people. People who need dogs. I want to help." She walked back to him, brushed a stray curl from his forehead. "I think you already are." The next week, Caleb received a letter from the local animal rescue center. Someone had told them about his speech, about Max, about the club. They wanted him to come speak to the volunteers. Caleb stared at the letter for a long time. Then he turned to Max and said, "Guess we've got more work to do." Max barked once, sharp and proud. They were just getting started. The days following Caleb's first speech were filled with a new energy, a quiet, steady momentum that had begun to take root in the hearts of his classmates, his teachers, and even in the community. Max, the German Shepherd puppy who had once been abandoned, was now a symbol of something much larger than herself. She was a beacon of hope, a reminder that the smallest acts of kindness could change the world. Caleb was determined to keep pushing forward with his cause. He had found his voice, and now it was time for others to hear it. The voice for the Voiceless Club began to grow. More students showed up each week, eager to help, to volunteer, and to be part of something meaningful. The school was alive with the energy of compassion, of hope, and of new possibilities. But Caleb knew that this was only the beginning. One cold December morning, just as winter's grip began to tighten around the small town, Caleb received a call from Principal Dawson. His voice was warm but serious. "Caleb," he said, "I need you to come to my office. I've got something to show you." Max, ever by his side, padded along behind him as they made their way down the hallway. The buzz of the school seemed quieter today, as if the air itself held its breath. When Caleb entered Principal Dawson's office, he was greeted by a surprise. On the desk was a large box, covered in plain brown paper, with a note pinned to the top. The handwriting was familiar. "Open it," the principal said, smiling warmly. Caleb's fingers trembled as he peeled back the paper, revealing a carefully wrapped bundle. When he unwrapped it, his heart skipped a beat. It was a plaque, a beautiful wooden sign engraved with the words, "The Voice for the Voiceless, in memory of Bella." Caleb's throat tightened. He knew who Bella was. She was the dog who had inspired it all, the one who had been abandoned in the shopping cart, the one who had waited in silence for someone to return. Bella's legacy had sparked everything Caleb had done, and this plaque was a tribute to her. Principal Dawson placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "Bella wasn't just a dog. She was a part of all of us. You've done more than start a club. You've started a movement. And this plaque, it's for her, and for everyone who's ever felt forgotten." Tears welled in Caleb's eyes as he gazed at the plaque. It was an honor, but more than that, it was a reminder of what could be accomplished when people didn't give up, when they chose to care, to speak for those who couldn't. "Thank you," Caleb whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The principal smiled and nodded. "It's not just for you, Caleb. It's for Max, for Bella, and for every single animal out there waiting for someone to hear their voice." Max sat at Caleb's feet, her tail wagging gently. Caleb knelt down to scratch behind her ears, his heart swelling with pride. "Bella never got to speak, but she's speaking now," Caleb said, his voice steady. "Exactly," Principal Dawson replied. "And so are you, Caleb. You've given her a voice." As the months passed, the Voice for the Voiceless Club flourished. Caleb and Max continued to visit the animal shelter, spending time with the animals who had no one to love them. Caleb was growing into his new role, not just as a student, but as a young advocate for change. With every visit, every adoption event, and every fundraiser, the club's reach expanded, touching more lives and more hearts. One Saturday afternoon, Caleb and Max were at the local animal shelter, playing with a group of puppies that had just been brought in. The shelter workers were busy with paperwork, but Caleb noticed a little girl standing alone by the window, looking out at the puppies. Her face was streaked with tears, and she held something tightly in her hands. Caleb walked over to her slowly, not wanting to startle her. Max, sensing the girl's sadness, padded quietly behind him. "Hey there," Caleb said softly. "Are you okay?" The little girl turned to face him, her eyes wide and sad. She shook her head, clutching a small stuffed animal to her chest. It was a dog, worn from years of love. "I don't want to go home," the girl whispered. "I don't want to leave them behind." Caleb smiled gently, kneeling down to her level. "You don't have to leave them behind. You can give them a chance. just like someone gave Max a chance. The girl's eyes brightened slightly, and she looked at Max, who sat beside Caleb, her tail thumping the floor. "She's beautiful," the girl said, reaching out to pet Max. "I want to help them. I want to help the puppies." Caleb nodded. "You already are. Just by caring, you're helping." The girl smiled, a small but genuine smile. "What should I do next?" Caleb's heart swelled. "Join the Voice for the Voiceless Club. You can help in so many ways. We need people who care. People like you." The girl looked down at her stuffed animal and then back at Max. "Okay, I'll help." By the end of the school year, Caleb and Max had not only built a lasting legacy for Bella, but they had also created a ripple effect of kindness and compassion that spread far beyond their school. The Voice for the Voiceless Club had grown to include not just students from Caleb's school, but also members of the local community, adults, volunteers, families, and even business owners who wanted to help. Every month, the club hosted adoption events, fundraisers, and awareness campaigns to support the shelter animals. Caleb's voice had become a powerful tool for change. And through it all, Max remained by his side, a constant reminder of how one small act of kindness could change an entire community. As the school year came to a close, Principal Dawson held a special ceremony to honor Caleb and the Voice for the Voiceless Club. They presented Caleb with another plaque, this one engraved with the names of every student and volunteer who had helped along the way. The ceremony was emotional. Caleb's mother, Maria, stood in the audience, her eyes glistening with tears as she watched her son accept the plaque. She had always known Caleb had a heart full of compassion, but seeing him up there, his words echoing in the room, his voice strong and clear, was a moment she would never forget. As Caleb stood there, holding the plaque in his hands, he looked at Max and whispered, "We did it, girl. We really did it." Max barked softly in agreement, her eyes sparkling with pride. And for the first time in his life, Caleb felt truly at peace. He had found his purpose, and through it, he had given a voice to those who could never speak for themselves. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun.